This is TWiT.
So, fellow Microsoft MVP and a Club TWiT member, Kasper Larsen, I had lunch today, and he dropped this off with me. And this is the Mosgaard Whiskey Moscatel Single Malt. So, one of 440 bottles. This is actually bottle 431. It was bottled back in March of 24. We've talked about Danish whiskey before. I talked about the Stauning back in episode 874, so about 20 episodes ago. Really didn't get Denmark didn't get into whiskey until getting into the EEC. A lot of rules changes in 2005 that made it easier for small manufacturers to happen. Stauning was arguably one of the first of the contemporary whiskey makers in Denmark. Mosgaard was started in 2015, so somewhat later than that, by Jessin Gitte Mosgaard. Jez Mosgaard was the CTO of a company called Libertone, which still exists today. They make high-end audio equipment using Wi-Fi, so think of a sort of Scandinavian-style Sonos type technology. Although curiously, they had it was a startup company and was funded. They had a major acquisition event in 2014 by a Hong Kong consortium, and just left in 2015 to start Mosgaard. So, well, maybe he made some money. I hope he did, because he turned it into whiskey, and that's not a bad thing. The distillery itself is in southern Fyn, which is down in the South Funen archipelago. It's just west of Copenhagen and close to the border with Germany there, although it's in on the waterway, so it's a fair bit off. It's an old farm. They have apple trees and things like that. They are buying local organic barley. It's a great growing region for barley, so there's tons of it. Their water is heavily calcified, so lime water, the same sort of stuff the Americans use for bourbon because it tastes good. And they have handmade stills from Portugal. In fact, they do a lot of Portuguese-related things, which I found interesting, including a ton of different kinds of barrels from Portugal for sherry and for Spanish and port as well. Like most micro distilleries, they make a gin because you can get that out on year one, where whiskey takes somewhat longer. They started in 2015. Their first bottlings of whiskey don't come till 2019. This particular edition, again, only in 2024. This is a cask strength single malt. And they, again, only made 440 bottles of it. Sells for about 1,000 Danish kroner. It was only available in Denmark. I got bottle 431. And so roughly about $150 US. So I hate to show you guys a whiskey that you can't buy, but you probably can't buy it. But and the reason is, not only was it a tiny small batch that was only run once, but this run won the 2024 World Whiskey Award for Best Single Malt from a small batch company. So, yeah. Stunning, unbelievable that they pulled this off. So organic barley from Denmark. They then put it into Jim Beam casks for 3.5 years. So American bourbon, classic thing to do on the initial round, and then did 1.5 years in Moscatel sherry. Moscatel is a different sherry than most. The vast majority of sherries are actually made with the Palomino grape. There's 3 different green grapes that they use in eras to make sherry, and Palomino makes the 90% of it. That's what makes the very dry sherries that most people are familiar with. The other 2 are Pedro Jimenez, or they're called PX, and Moscatel. Their grapes are raisined, so after they're picked, they're laid out on a sheet and they're dried in the sun. This is similar to the Amarone process out of Piedmont for Italian wine, and they make a much sweeter sherry. Typically, when sherry is made, it's fortified with grape spirit. And they'll often only do it to 15% to allow a certain amount of yeast action to continue and reduce the sweetness by consuming all the sugars. But when you're doing Moscatel, you raise up to 18%, which wipes out the yeast, and so the sugars are gone. They stay in place. It's then aged in Spanish oak, and one of the most I may end up having to do a whole bit just on sherry alone, because what's the weird thing about sherry? It's their barreling techniques. So they blend their barrels together, but do it a particular way. Their oldest barrels are on the bottom stack, and then there's a second stack and a third stack. And by law, they're only allowed to take a 30% out of the bottom tier barrel out to actually make a bottling. Then they refill that bottle with the stack above it, and then refill that barrel from the stack above that, and then put new make in the top stack. And which is why you always get a minimum of 3 years of aging for any Moscatels. So that's the sort of flavor that they've used here, is this rather sweet sherry barrel. And also a year and a half is really quite a long time. Most of the time when I see whiskeys that have done a finishing in a sherry, it's under a year, 6 months, 9 months, and that's about it. But this, went 18. So right off the bat, 57% alcohol. So there went your nose hairs, right? You took a big snort of that, and it just say goodbye. And then, but fruity, got a little sweetness to it. Big sip. Right off the front, it's not a lot of front, but a whole lot of back. So it goes burning on down, and it's got.
Is that a good thing or no?
Yeah. I'm curious.
It's a hit because it's a relatively young whiskey. So, wow.
When I buy whiskey, I want it to go burning on down.
Yeah, my instinct on this would be to immediately add a little bit of water to it. 57% is a lot. So I'm just putting a little drip of water into this, give it a bit of a swirl. And I can see the
cask
threading.
Strength. I mean,
it's 57%. So I can see threading. I can see that there's congeners breaking down there. So this is going to change this whiskey. Nose is the same, but I didn't get the burn. So definitely we broke in the 57.
Why does a little bit of water break that?
Well, you're only trying to you're not trying to get it to 20%, right?
Right.
So you figure this was
you're just reducing the proof. Okay.
I reduced the proof. I'll probably put it down to about 45. Where you'd probably want it. So yeah, the heat's gone. It's still warming. The real question is, did you lose some of those cooler flavors, right? That citrus note and so forth, some of the vanillins, because sometimes those break as well. But I don't think so. I think this became a lot nicer with a splash of water.
Look at that. In the words of Kenny Loggins.
Yeah. So
He's gone.
Going into 57%, there was only ever 440 bottles in the first place. I have one of them, and it's going to be empty within the next 2 days because I'm not taking it home. But there is a whole bunch of other whiskey made by Mosgaard, and you should try some if you can find it. These are not widely exported. This is another one of those 21st century small production companies that seems to want to stay that way. They're doing a lot of custom barrelings for whiskey clubs, that sort of thing, because they can afford to. In fact, I've got a couple of other whiskey distillers I've been looking at lately that do a lot of custom barrelings for clubs and things. So that might be a way to find it, to get involved with a club that has a relationship with them that does an edition where they may only make 40 or 50 bottles, and one of them will be yours. But if you're in Denmark, especially in Copenhagen, with some very nice whiskey stores, you can find Mosgaard on the shelves there. But you'll find one of the other editions often finished in sherry and port casks.
Nice.
That's what I got. So I'm very happy to find this. It's one of those rare unicorn type whiskeys once again. And so I'm happy to share it with you guys, and we'll get back to something more findable. Although I spent a couple of days in the Netherlands and fell in with an even weirder rare whiskey. We'll get to that.
That's awesome. Well, Richard, I think you're going to be going to bed a little early tonight. Actually, it's not that early, is it?
Man. It's 10 o'clock here.
All right. Take that bottle.
It's been a long day, right? I gotta break out of this hotel room that I got the space for and pack everything up, get it back to the house, back to the hotel. So.